Welcome to our panel discussion about Pushout, the criminalization of Black girls in schools by Dr. Monique Morris. This event is brought to you by the Malden Public Library, the Network for Social Justice, and the Mystic Valley area branch of the NAACP. Thank you all for being here with us today. My name is Urga, and I will be your moderator. Before our phenomenal panelists briefly introduces themselves, I would like to say that this space was intentionally created for us to share our thoughts, experiences, and personal reflections. The remarks that are made about the documentary by our panelists are not representative of the institutions that they work for. Our panelists will answer questions in random order for about 50 minutes, and then we'll have Q&A with the audience for about 40 minutes. Fingers crossed, hopefully we'll be able to do that. I will be asking the audience to answer some questions as well through polling and through chat. So please respond to our questions. I'd also like to provide you with some terms that will be defined in the chat for your reference if needed. Criminalization, racialized gender bias, and adultification. Our goal today is to talk about what we learned from the documentary to foster a deeper understanding of Black girls in our communities and to amplify the need for changing this normalized narrative of unfair treatment that causes emotional trauma and racialized perceptions of themselves in the school across the United States. And yes, we will learn that it's happening here in Malden too. It is our hope that this topic can be widely discussed so that attitudes can shift and hearts can open to lead to positive changes in the lives of Black girls everywhere. And let us center humanity as we engage and interact with one another. I do want to emphasize that this is a safe space where we will hear about experiences that may be triggering, and some use of language and content will not be appropriate for youngsters. So if you have little ones around, please have them go into another space if possible. So I'd like to welcome our phenomenal panelists who are here with us today. In alphabetical order, I'm gonna ask you all to please tell us your name, pronoun if any, and one fun fact about yourself. I will begin to illustrate. My name is Urga Purette. My pronouns are she, hers. My fun fact is I can juggle up to 3 different shaped objects at once. Thank you. So we'll start off with Jen. We can't hear you. Let's move to Eric. Oh, I think I hear her.
Okay, there we go. Is that better?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay, so I'm Jen Hedgington, a teacher in Malden. Fun fact, I'm currently in Dominican Republic, hence my reception might be a little shoddy, but we will work together.
Next up, Eric.
All right, good afternoon all. My name is Eric Henry. I'm a parent of 15-year-old triplets here in Malden, rising sophomores, and definitely glad to be here. Fun fact about me, I've been to over 30 countries and territories in my travels, and I probably top 2 would probably spend the most time in Italy, and I think I just had the most pleasurable time in Turkey.
Nice. Laura.
My name is Laura. I use she, her pronouns. And a fun fact about me is that I can wiggle my ears.
You can wiggle?
Mhm.
Nice. Alexandria?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Super excited to be in this space with you all. I'm the Director of Political Advocacy at Black Boston, as well as a PhD student in Applied Developmental Psychology at Suffolk. And my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And one fact about me is similar to Eric. I studied abroad in Denmark, and during my time there, I was able to go to around 6 to 7 European countries. So it was really fun.
Nice. Melanie?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Melanie Rush, and I'm the Research and Policy Assistant at the Massachusetts Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and my fun fact is that I can't wink. I've tried for years. I can't do it. It's kind of like a bad squint, so that's something fun about me.
Awesome. And Abdel?
Hi, my name is Abdel Sepulveda. I am currently a principal at a K-8 school in Cambridge, but I was in Malden for almost 16 years. And if you hear some girls, by girls I mean bulldogs, playing, is that they just end up eating and now they're playing. So I apologize for that. Pronouns are he, she, his, him. Fun fact about me is that, sorry, the girls are really going at it. I'll put them in the crate in a second. Fun fact about me is that I have performed 2 solos at Jordan Hall here in Boston, singing.
Ooh, okay. Welcome all. Thank you for sharing. I previously asked the audience to summarize their reaction to the documentary with using one word. And now I'd like to ask you all to do the same. We'll start with Eric.
The one word I had chosen was insubordinate. To hear that word and then to hear my daughters tell me later that that is a word that was used to refer to them, it got my attention as what discipline means.
Insubordinate. Thank you. Laura?
I'd say shocking.
Audience shared that. Alexandria?
I would say hopeful.
Melanie?
I'd say for most of it frustrating, but by the end kind of inspired that maybe we can do something about it. So I know that's 2, but different parts, different feelings.
Got it. Abdel?
I'm gonna follow Melanie's lead and do 2. One of them is not surprising. That is talking. And the other one is unveiling in the sense of like dismantling that which is obvious to us, to the pastors that are here, but might not be obvious to the rest of our community members.
Thank you. And Jen?
I'd say disappointing.
Disappointing. I agree with that one. Thank you. Please briefly summarize the narratives of the girls who were in the documentary that we saw. Abdel, I'd like you to share Ariana's story. Jen, I'd like you to share Emma's story. Thora, I'd like you to talk about Tariana's story. Eric will share Kiara's story, and Alexandria will share Samaya's story. And we're gonna summarize this in 1 minute or less, please, for everyone here. Thank you.
So I'll start. Ariana in the documentary is a 16-year-old student who have been suspended multiple times in different schools. She says that she didn't know what to do with her rage. She experienced being bullied and also experienced several adverse childhood events, or ACEs, which we're going to be discussing as well. There's this hopeful side to her narrative when she changes schools, and even in the face of extra trauma with the death of her father and the burning of her house, her school comes together to help both staff and students. And she's a musician, which she rocks.
Thank you. The next up. Jen, for Emma's story, please.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the background noise. It's live out here. So Emma experienced bullying in middle school by her classmates that left her depressed, angry, and with anxiety, resulting in self-isolation. Her attitude changed, her grades dropped, and she was repeatedly and unnecessarily suspended for minor infractions. She was constantly sent to alternative detention at another school, which furthered her seclusion. It wasn't until she went to a new school, Columbus City Preparatory School for Girls, that concerned teachers and a principal dedicated to finding new ways of dealing with students like her, which helped Emma forge a new path towards success.
Thank you. Next up, Dora.
Tariana, she was hanging out with the wrong people at school. She was getting caught in the life, and she would start skipping school, and she would, end up going to spending time in juvie and being kicked out of school. And then eventually she got her life back on track. She got her high school diploma, and she completed a year of community college. And so now she's doing good things. She has a steady job, and yeah.
Awesome. Eric?
Yes, I might have the Kiara's story and that of Samaya resonated with me as well for the same instances that there's a couple of the stories, these two stories in particular, about the light. Parents were actually vocal in the interviews and the processes. Kiara was in high school. The parents, the immigrant daughter of Haitian immigrant parents, who was just being, in her opinion, being liked because she would fight for her friends and stuff like this. Then I think she realized that you got to go through some things to get some places, and she began to be involved in a program that would allow her to channel her energy into spoken word and being a young thespian and things of this nature. So her story was only up and up, but it's very striking to say that for someone her age to say that you have to go through some things to get to where you want to be.
Thank you. And Alexandria?
Yes. So Samaya had a argument with another student, and Samaya's teacher was frustrated with her and physically dragged her by the chair and put her outside. And Samaya was inquiring about why her actions warranted that aggressive and volatile reaction from her teacher. Samaya knew that the teacher was going to call her parents, and Samaya stated in the documentary that her parents wouldn't really believe her. She was left outside and wandered the streets of Sacramento for a few hours before her school notified her parents about her disappearance. Samaya ended up at a bridge where she was contemplating if she should end her life right there.
Get goosebumps every time I think about it. Thank you so much for sharing. So now I'm gonna ask the audience to take a few seconds to, I believe the poll should be coming up, and I'd like you to choose one of the girls' stories which resonated the most with you. Please choose only one. I know it might be a little tough. Ooh, 100% Samaya's story. Now down to 80. Kiara's story touched folks, and Tariana's. Yeah, overwhelmingly Samaya's story. I'll share the results. It really pulls at the heartstring. Now, panelists, please share your personal overall reflection, concerns, feelings, or what resonated with you the most after you watched the Pushout documentary. Melanie, if you wouldn't mind kicking it off.
Sure. So as I mentioned, kind of for a lot of the movie, there was anger and frustration that this was continuing to happen and to happen all across the country every single day to Black girls in school, and that we're only really beginning to talk about it now, even this has obviously been a problem for a long time. And I agree with a lot of the audience that Samaya's story in particular really resonated, just to think about how young she was and how, you know, ideally we want our young children in school to be full of hope and excitement and to love to learn and be excited to go to school. And the way that this system so early can begin to break that is just really disheartening. And so that very much stuck with me. And I think overall, in terms of kind of reflections, the movie just confirms for me that this is an issue that everything I can do to raise my voice and talk about, I want to do and continue to do to try to change this system.
Thank you. Panelists, feel free to hop on and share your piece because I'd like to hear from everyone.
I can go next. I was not surprised at all about the narratives that were shown. What I will say is that I was glad that the documentary not only had stories like kind of like the harrowing and deplorable stories, but also the creators of the film were able to supplement these stories with quotes and messages of commitment and love about the well-being of Black girls. I thought that was excellent. We saw the author of the book, Dr. Monique Morris, shed light on the adultification of Black girls, and also other leaders who have built organizations centered on creating safe spaces. My other reactions were rage as well. The first moment of the documentary, we see a police officer literally dragging a Black girl out of the classroom. So I had a moment of rage there. And then again, hopefulness kept coming back because I think throughout the documentary, there were pieces of, there were just pockets of like hopefulness. Like there are actionable solutions that we can do. So I found that to be really important because we can go through historical context, prejudice and bias towards Black girls are presented, but it's another thing to actually say, this is what's happening, but this is also what we can do to kind of rectify the situation. And another thing that I want to talk about is the moments in the film where Black girls were able to just let go. And what I mean by that is there was like a moment where specifically Kiara, I think she was doing theater or she was doing spoken word. And I think using art and other forms of expression is so important. So that was something that resonated with me for sure. Yeah.
And just like Alexandria and Melanie, the documentary, which by the way is extremely well done and balances the exposure of the reality with also the elements of empowerment for our Black girls and Black young women. And I know that in scholarly communities, whether they are Black and Brown communities or even more liberal-minded white communities, there's always this debate about how much do we focus on the Black suffering and then, because it for some folks, it becomes kind of like pleasurable that to see the Black suffering and the poor Black people. But no, like the directors of the documentary did a great job at also presenting these beautiful young women like taking ownership of their lives and using their agency after they have been able to identify skills that they were lacking. Another thing, and I apologize for my dogs. Hopefully you can hear me well. Another thing that kept coming to mind and to my heart through the documentary have been my experiences as an administrator, both as a assistant principal and a school principal, where I have been with other district-wide administrators, not only from my previous district, but also with other school districts, doing community-based justice programs where we meet with assistant DAs to discuss students that are in the system. And I remember, and I keep feeling my rage going up because I remember many meetings where many of the district leaders had nicknames for the students that were in the system. Oh, we're discussing so and so, this young black girl that is sophomore at this particular high school. Oh, we know her by this last name because of this nickname, because of this, and everyone would laugh. And I've and I will actually stand up and say like, no, like this isn't okay. And of course I was being told to relax. I'm like, no, I cannot, because if we are the ones that are advocating to create a different way of helping and developing skills for these people, we cannot have nicknames. And behind the curtain, a lot of that happens.
Thank you for giving space for that, because there are a lot of things that are happening behind closed doors that shouldn't be happening. And when you do speak up and speak out, it's just like, what? So it's really, really important that we amplify the fact that if we're doing this social justice equity work, we need to be doing it with fidelity and centering humanity across the board, regardless who's watching and who isn't and who's listening. Thank you so much, Abdel,
Exactly.
for that.
And if I may just add one thing, like something that I don't remember who was that said it in the documentary, is that this work has to be rooted in love for Black girls, okay? Not on savior mentality or anything like that, because that what happens there, and that quote like really resonated with me, because even though I've been doing this for a while, it just like really put it in context. Oh, these folks have been doing this because their work is not really rooted in love and the best for this population.
Exactly. Would anybody else like to share some thoughts before we move on?
I would. I've seen this multiple times, but each time I always get really sad. But then I have that little voice in the back of my head. It's like, well, this is expected. You know, you're going to a school as a Black girl, and just because the fact that you're Black, you already have a target on your back, even if you didn't do something. And it's not just going to school, it's going anywhere. Like, people are always going to be suspicious. Going to the stores, people are always watching you, making sure you're not stealing anything just because of the color of your skin. And watching this, it's just, I always get really sad, and then I get mad. But then I'm like, oh wait, I could resonate with what just happened. And it's like, you shouldn't be that at such a young age learning to advocate for yourself. You are a child, you should be enjoying your childhood. You shouldn't constantly have the stress of worrying what's going to happen at school. Am I going to have a confrontation with the teacher? Am I going to have to beat someone up just so I could have friends? Like, that should be the last thing on your mind. And it's really sad that Black girls have to go through this every single day. And like you all said, we put on a front without knowing that we're doing it. And so, because you just want to be acceptable to society, you want to be acceptable in school, and you just want to, you know, find a way to fit in, even though it's not truly being yourself. And so it's just sad that this happens every day.
Thank you. That segues to the next question. So I'd like to ask you all, did you experience any racial biases from teachers, administrators, peers, or staff while you were students in school because of the complexion of your skin? Thora just answered that piece. I'd like to hear from other folks.
I can go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I attended Bolton High, Neshoba Regional High in Bolton, where I was one of few Black students in school. It was my last year of high school. And my sociology professor or teacher decided we were going to a field trip to Concord Prison. Again, I was the only Black child in my class. We get to the prison and we're sitting in a circular shape, waiting for the inmates to come in. Inmates being Black and brown men. Prior to them walking into the class, my teacher looks at me in front of everyone and says, "Hey, Jen, you might be able to find your prom date here tonight." And like, everyone had their head down. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to your teacher? But I could tell you that he became my villain in my life. I don't remember his name. I don't remember anything he ever taught me. I just remember that one line. And because of him, I've grown up with a fear of white men because every white man was that teacher to me. So it took me a while, still takes me a while to trust white men because of this one teacher.
The impact is lasting. Thank you so much. Alexandria?
Yeah, for sure. My first experience happened when I was, it was coming school. I don't know if it's called that right now, but it was coming school and I was in the 4th grade. And I remember I was sitting in class and I heard like where I was sitting there's like the window and the window was open and I heard like patois. And I knew that was my mother. My mother's Jamaican. So I knew that accent and I knew that she was upset. And I was super distracted in class. But after like I went home, after class, after that happened, I asked my mother, I was like, I kind of like heard you while I was in class. And I was inquiring about like, okay, what happened? And she said that she actually had a meeting with my teacher prior, like in the morning, about my progress in school. And during that time, I wasn't as scholarly as I am today. And she essentially said that, I don't think your child is smart. And I think she actually needs to be tested or she needs to like take a test to see like IQ or something like that. My mother was extremely hurt. And that has I want to highlight what Jennifer said, because I think the things that are told to us at young ages still have a lasting impact. I think I'm definitely more confident now, but I think as a Black woman, I still tend to question myself. And we call this imposter syndrome, like in academia and all these other spaces. And it's true, like I always question like, okay, am I doing good? Am I doing what I'm supposed to do? And it has a long lasting impact where that shouldn't be the case. I should just be able to exist and make mistakes and be okay. So that definitely has a lasting impact. And that teacher was not a Black woman, but she was another woman of color. And this is why I always say that there are other people of color that uphold white supremacy that are not always allies all the time.
Yes, thank you so much for giving voice to that. That is the truth. Eric?
So where do we start? Where we continue? It's a lot of it's a lot of things that's going on. I think the question was, had I experienced any direct racism or anything like this in my life while in a school setting and stuff? And I probably can say no to that. Yeah.
You're muted.
I'm sorry. I went through a fairly mixed high school, 45%, I would say Black, white to Black. And I was in National Honor Society, a lot of my friends and all this sort of good stuff. But I think the context of how it, since I've kind of been doing this work here over the last year and a half or so, is that what's striking to me is how it starts, how it becomes so insidiously engraved into the processes that are being taught to our youth. And then when I say that, I speak directly to the educators and specifically in the room, and that is in the school my kids go, they begin to read the classic by Mark Twain very early, 5th grade. They're reading Tom Sawyer, inward this, inward that, and they try to, and then they'll ask the children questions like, "So how do you think that the people felt when they got on the boat coming from Africa?" I'm like, whoa, wait, what are you talking about? Harriet Tubman was a conductor on the railroad. That's all you have to say? And so now my kids were in 9th grade and they, Thora's here witness, and I, you know, I'm feeling like the Hulk sometimes. I'm always in a kind of in a state of rage behind these things because this is live and it is affecting my children, and I see it is. So how am I failing my children by continuing to fight, or am I, am I doing what's best for my children? And so in 11th grade, there was this, what was the bookstore? Cerno Cereal or something of this nature?
Anita
That,
Sonero.
yeah, it was another, so now in the 10th grade, 9th grade, you're having to read other works that specifically disparage one race of people. And you experience in light of this white centering that's going on to perpetuate these things. And so, and then my niece is in graduate school. That's at, I think she's at Cambridge College in graduate school. But she has an assignment, and the assignment says, the opening line of the assignment is, okay, so write on the blackboard this, or if you don't have a blackboard, write on the whiteboard. So first of all, I'm probably one of that age that I remember that there were actually blackboards in school. But I don't think there's a whole bunch of people that is in Cambridge College with my niece that know about the board actually being black as an instrument to write instructions upon in a classroom setting. So why do you have to, if it's a blackboard or as a whiteboard? And then the question goes on to say, there's 11, you're the captain of the ship. There's 11 people. Only 7 can fit in the lifeboat. You have to decide who gets the call. If all of the people, they identify a black girl with a Hispanic girl with diabetes, a black college student with AIDS, and I think an Hispanic woman who is pregnant. No other category identifying markers of such or assigned to any other of the 7 of the remaining passages. Why is this the norm? Why has this become so pervasive, so normalized, and it doesn't stop? This is what I'm learning. It doesn't stop.
The curricula definitely needs to be looked into, and changes definitely need to be made. Thank you so much for sharing that. We're going to move along. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, 7% of the 4 million teachers in the United States are Black, while Black girls make up 16% of the student population. How could the deficit of Black female educators be a contributing factor in how Black girls are perceived and treated in schools? This question goes to Abdel and Alexandria, please.
Alexandria, would you like to go first?
You can go first.
No, yeah, it's up to.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think that's an excellent question. For me, I think the lack of Black women educators for sure has an influence. It also impacts the way educators see and perceive Black girls. I think many people, particularly white educators, don't fully understand the developmental processes of Black girls or understand the construction of Black childhood, or they've never considered racial socialization or gender differences. So the question for me becomes like, how can you sit in the room full of educators and there's a power disparity based on race, you being the majority, creating rules, policies, and regulations that will impact Black youth. And then if that becomes like the culture, then we're never going to have spaces of healing, which Dr. Morris Brown in the documentary kept alluding to, like we need locations of healing. We're never gonna get there if the spaces don't look like us. And for me, I think we need Black women educators in these spaces, in these spaces to offer insight on the multiple worlds Black girls live in. So home, church, like different extracurricular activities, those influence the messages that they see and also their behavior. So I think that in my experience, when I've had Black women educators, they understand that the society continually creates rules to prohibit our success. And with that knowledge, they're able to create programming and different initiatives. So again, like creating nurturing ecosystems for us. And I think that's really important. And from research, we know that Black women teachers and educators have humanizing teaching practices because they're experts in building the cultural wealth of Black children. And for me, I know a lot of people say like representation matters, and I think that's true, but I would even go further to say we not only need Black female educators, but we need Black female educators who have a full understanding of intersectionality, and places of like truly coming from places of love. And again, I think there are educators of color who uphold white supremacy. So for me, I don't want to just limit it to Black educators, but even go further to say Black educators who do X, Y, and Z. And then the last thing I want to say is we also have to examine why there's a deficit of Black educators. And that has to do with, and Abdel, you probably know more about what goes on behind the scenes, but one thing I think, and you can correct me, is like the hiring practices. I think racial assumptions that get in the way, like racism and sexism are at play when it comes to hiring practices for sure.
Alexandria, I think you are absolutely correct there when you put the sort of like the backgrounds to why we don't have too many Black female educators. Another thing that we need to consider is that, and the documentary highlighted this, that we actually, before Brown versus the Board of Education, we had a good number of Black schools that were doing well with many amazing Black female teachers. With Brown versus the Board of Education, which some scholars like Gloria, I'm forgetting her last name now. It will come to me. Some scholars have suggested that we would have been better off without it because it came through us. So not so much to actually highlight the rights of Black students, but because of it benefited white America. So the whole notion of interest conversions theory comes to play. So when Brown versus Board of Education happened, what do we see? We see a backlash from white America, from white politicians, and our Black schools are closed, are defunded, and those teachers that are excellent teachers, that are Black teachers, don't get the support that they need in the new schools that are integrated. And who will want to go to work in a place that they don't feel that they belong? No one. So when I hear my colleagues saying like, listen, we're trying to diversify our staff, but BC and Leslie and Boston and BU and every other university and college that we work with only has white candidates, and for that matter, white female candidates. So it's not our problem. I always tell them, listen, well, but it is because it's so rooted in what on the framework and what makes the American education system what it is right now. So what we have to do is make sure that those of us that are in education, those of us that are here, that we talk to our young Black girls about like, listen, have you considered being a teacher? Have you considered like, imagine like how much, how great you will be. So there's the element of, there's the historical aspect of it. So that we have that is actually has been coded into law. And right now we are going through that with the whole panic over critical race theory. And one thing that, as I'm watching the documentary for a second time, I found myself being triggered with the fact that here we have all this precious yet vulnerable and sad stories being told over and over again because there's a nation that is deaf and is refusing to hear. And we have to keep telling the whole story, whereas you just need one media to pick up that racial critical race theory is a bad thing. And now we have people doing GoFundMe to help pay for psychological treatment for white girls that feel that are not accepted. So, and I'm not bringing that up to as a class or race war, but as a reality that's what we have to deal with. Like I and thank you, Alessandra, for saying that we also have educators of color that embrace and they feel empowered or feel obliged to perpetuate that white supremacist mentality in education, because we also cannot be our own oppressors. And I want my educators of color, whether they are Black, they're brown, they're Asian, they are from Saudi Arabia, or from or a Muslim country, I want them to not only celebrate their heritage, but also to speak truth to power and to speak the truth with a compassionate heart, to hold their colleagues accountable. And Jen and I have experienced this with colleagues of color, that you get frustrated because they remain quiet, or in the face of something that is blatantly wrong, or a practice that you know is going to impact negatively a particular population of our school, they remain quiet. And Jen and Erga knows this, that like I will go to those people and say, like, you need to wake up, because your silence, your complicity is creating more harm. It's damaging more, because our kids, when they see someone like Jen and I have a former student, a powerful young woman who's going to change the world and hopefully be president, who the first Black teacher that she had was Jen. And she changed this young woman's life completely. Not only because she's, when the girls saw Jen in the classroom, her affective filter went down. She didn't have to explain herself. She knew that Jen got it. And Jen is about impact, not intent. And I know I need my white colleagues, whether they're administrators or teachers or counselors, to always remember that whatever we do in education, we need to value impact over intent. Because I bet that if we were to do a separate documentary and interview all the teachers that have worked with all these girls, they would say, oh, but that wasn't my intent. Guess what? I don't care about your intent. I care about the impact that you had in these girls. And as we already mentioned, the impact that we had, that we as educators have in kids, lasts a lifetime.
Absolutely.
And change that. So, and I know that I'm long-winded in my answers, but so how do we keep diversifying our staff? We need administrators that purposely, in the hiring process, go after people of color to teach. And we also need DESI to look at the practices that we have. For instance, like the MTEL. The MTEL itself, there's some biases there, okay? And if you might have someone that is excellent in presenting in the pedagogy, I might not be able to pass the MTEL a couple of times or 3 times. It costs money, so let's help the people.
Very, very well said. I just want to just really highlight, when we're talking about the hiring process, we need to also speak on retention and support, like the both of you all mentioned, and the possibility of affinity spaces, because it's kind of hard when you're an educator of color and you're trying to advocate for a student of color, the backlash that follows.
Absolutely. I actually have that in my notes as well, that it's not only to bring them through the door, but also to give them the space and the support that they need. Because the support that they need as a brown, gay, cis man is different from the support that Jen needs as a Black female educator. It's different from what you need. And we need affinity spaces. The more detail and that they are, the better. Because otherwise, you have burnout, which is very prominent in education, even with white colleagues, but it's doubled with Black educators.
That's right. Thank you so much for your thoughtful responses. This next question is for the audience. I'm going to ask that you please put your answers in the chat. What city or town did you all go to school, K to 12? And what grade were you in when you experienced having your first Black teacher? It's a shame that I'm asking this, but it's the truth. Because just to amplify the fact that there is a need and we just need to hear it more. So having that visual would be really helpful. I am going to turn things over to Thora. to please share your experience over at the Mystic Valley Regional Charter School, and the impact that your experience has had on you to date.
Yeah, I've been going to Mystic Valley since I was in kindergarten. So I have an experience there. My Mystic Valley experience has always been really rocky, but it was really bad to say when I hit 8th grade. I had my homeroom teacher was actually my English teacher as well, and things started off really great actually, and I was really liking her until the second day of school, and she just kind of came out and just said, "Oh yeah, I taught in Boston public schools, so I know how to fight, and I've been punched before." And then it was kind of just like this thing where all the Black kids in my class just kind of looked at each other and were like, was that a threat, or was that towards us? Like, is she trying to make a statement about us? And so, yeah, that was kind of just, I was like, that is bad news. And so later on in the year, I was having trouble with English class and I wasn't understanding the book. So I started to set up extra help sessions with her during my recess time, because I was a bus student, so I couldn't stay after school. And so that was going well. It lasted about a week or so. And then she started to slowly stop showing up. And I would be like sitting in the classroom just waiting for her. And so I was like, this isn't really working. And so that whole situation happened. And I think from that point on, she kind of just avoided me, because my dad would send her emails like, hey, Thor came home, said nothing happened, what's going on? And so I just went about my days, stopped going to the extra help because she just wasn't there, until my history teacher, actually, I was going to her for history help. And this was like when a major event happened. So I was with her during my lunchtime, because once again, bus student, couldn't stay after school, and I was just taking up my free time. So I was with her doing my history. And then all of a sudden, my homeroom teacher marches into my history teacher's room and says, Thor, you need to come in the back in the classroom and clean up someone's mess. And I was like, what are you talking about? And so then she's like, it's your job to sweep the floor when someone makes a mess. And I just sat there and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so she just stormed back out of the room. And then my history teacher got a text message and she's like, Thora, just go, I'll hold on to your project and you could come back to me as soon as you're finished. And so I was like, okay, thanks. So I went into the classroom and the kid spilled his rice on the floor and he was actually cleaning it up, until my teacher was like, no, you need to give the broom to Thora. She needs to clean it up she needs to clean it up. It's her job. And then I was like, well, you didn't make anyone else in the classroom do that. If that happened, you're just making me clean up after other people. It's not my mess. I'm not even eating my lunch. So I don't understand why I should be cleaning this. And then she got really red. And then she told me to give me my planner, which is, we do this thing called A plans, which is kind of like a accountability thing. And so if you do something bad, you get an A plan. 3 A plans is a detention. But she basically was like, give me your planner. And I was like, I'm not gonna give you my planner if I did nothing wrong. But obviously that was taken as a form of disrespect. And then she just like went over to my desk and took out my planner from like underneath my chair basket thing and started writing it. And then she said that I was being insubordinate on my planner, and I got A plan for being insubordinate / disrespectful. And so at this time I didn't know what insubordinate meant. And so I was like, what does that mean? She's like, oh, just look it up. You should know what it means. And so at this point, kids are staring at me in the classroom and they're like, she did nothing wrong, which I'm very thankful for them. They're very great about that. Everyone in the class knew that my teacher just like had problems with me. And so right after she wrote my A plan, she went to the classroom's phone and called another room. And she ended up calling the lead teacher and calling him, telling him that I was being disruptive in the classroom. And so then I was sent down to the lead teacher, and I was talking to him, and he's like, Thora, this isn't you. I know you don't act like this. What's going on? And then the next thing he said is something going on at your house? I know this isn't you. You're out of the normal, like, what's happening? And at that point, I was just pretty frozen and stuck in place, because he just said that something was going on in my house, or that I'm not acting, quote unquote, normal to him, and in front of his classroom. So all of my other peers and all of my other friends. And so I'm just standing there as he's practically yelling at me, saying, this isn't me. I don't disrespect teachers, etc. And so I have his students, my peers, staring at me. And then he said that I need to change my behavior. And then he's like, if something's happening, you could always talk to me, which is, I feel like, the token line for teachers. They always want you to feel inclusive, or they want you to feel welcome, when that's not the fact. And so I kind of just left the room without saying anything. And I'm like, I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. I'm so strong. And so it was like, once again, I realized I was just putting up so many walls that I've just had. My guards were all up, and I just didn't talk to anyone. I just left and went about my day like nothing had happened. And that was like a really big turning point in my year, because after that, I had most of the teachers were just staring me down in the hallways. Most of the teachers were just questioning me where I was going. And it was really, really tough, because it came to the point where I wouldn't be able to leave the room without a hall pass, or I wouldn't be able to leave a room without, actually, my homeroom teacher, English teacher as well, she made like a little plaque out of wood, and it said restroom on it. And she held it up in front of the class, and she's like, we have this because some people, and then she looks at me, spend too much time in the hallway, or spend too much time out of class and don't know how to control their time. So thanks to them, you're going to have to use this big piece of wood to go to the bathroom or to leave the room. And so I was basically the quote unquote root cause of the bathroom plaque. It came to the point where kids kind of figured out it was quote unquote my fault, and so they destroyed it for me. But yeah, I had targets on my back every single day. Teachers constantly asking me where I was going, if I had a hall pass, and I'd start getting A plans for not having a hall pass, or if my teacher didn't write her name on the piece of paper or write the time, they'd say that I took it off her desk and wrote it myself because it wasn't signed by a teacher. And I couldn't leave the room to go to my history teacher during my lunch period anymore. So it came to the point where my history grade was dropping because I wasn't, getting the material well, and I wasn't, keeping up with the extra help. And my English teacher, she'd be like, Thora is such a bad student. She doesn't listen. She doesn't pay attention during my class. But in my weekly reports, it would say that I was fantastic. Like in the little description, it would say fantastic. But then what she would actually say would be completely different. And I'd still be able to maintain an A in her class. So things just were not adding up. And then another incident once again was with another English teacher, a 7th grade English teacher. I was still in 8th grade at the time, but I was in the 7th grade building. And so my previous English teacher left his book, and then I was like, can I just go give this to him? And so my teacher said yes. And so I went to go give him the book, and then I enter his classroom, and then I give him the book, and then I leave. And then not a few seconds later, I hear the door burst open, and then I just hear someone yelling, yo, where are you going? You need to stop. And I was like, I just started to walk faster because I don't know who this teacher was talking to. I'm like, I don't know who yo is. Like, I don't know what that is. And so then I go into his special ed room, I'm just like, excuse me, but someone is down the hall chasing after me and I don't know who. And so my teacher goes out in the hallway and sees that it's this like 6-foot man named Mr. Francis, just frustrated. And then she's like, "You need to calm down, Mr. Francis." And so they're talking, and then she calls for me. And she's like, "Just don't say anything if you don't want to say anything. You're not in trouble. You are fine." So I go out in the room and I'm like, "Hello." And then he's like, "Do you know what you did wrong?" And I was like, "I don't, sir." And then because I didn't know his name. And so I'm like, "I don't, sir." And then he got really mad and he said, "I'm not sir, that's my father. Show some respect." And so he said, "My name is Mr. Francis." And I was like, "Okay, cool, Mr. Francis." I'm like, "What is the problem?" And he said that the problem was that I didn't knock on the door before entering. And so the whole yelling was because I didn't knock on the door, which is not a rule. You just, if someone is teaching, you walk through the back of the classroom silently. You don't knock on the door because you're going to disrupt the class. And so, yeah, he said I need to learn some manners and that I should have some respect for other people that are teaching. So, yeah. And then another time was that, this was probably the last time I'm going to talk, but my MCAS ELA teacher said she wouldn't answer my questions. And so it came to a point where I'd have my hand raised all class. And just to be heard, I just call out of turn so she knows that have my hand raised. No, but then she'd say that's disrespectful. So I'd get A plans from her a lot as well. But no one else in my class would. So I always found that very weird. Yeah, and I got detention for it as well before. So yeah, that's about it.
Thank you so very much, Thora, for sharing. There's just a lot to unpack right there. And I think it's really inspiring that you are willing and able to share your experiences in the way that you are doing. I am going to open this up to the panelists if they want to share a couple of words to just try to unpack this, and then we'll move on and ask your dad the next question. I am being mindful of time. So please, would anybody like to speak on what Thora has shared? Because there's a lot to unpack there.
I first want to validate your experiences and saying, thank you for sharing that. That is not easy to kind of relive that, even when you're speaking and you visualize everything. Right, exactly. You're literally visualizing everything. The emotions are there. So thank you so much for sharing. And one powerful thing that you said that really spoke to me was when you said, "I was trying so hard not to cry and to break." And I think a lot of the times, like, Black girls and Black women, we're always trying to be resilient, and that resilient framework is actually damaging to us. So thank you so much for like calling that out. And again, thank you for sharing your experiences.
The same as Alexander says, thank you for sharing your experiences. And I'm sorry that you went through that. You did not deserve to go through that, not once, let alone all those experiences that you went through. Besides that moment of like, I didn't want to cry, one thing that really jumped to me was the yo, and you kept on walking because that's your name. And here, the irony of someone with power taking dignity away from you by not calling you by your name, and then saying like you were being disrespectful, is angering and frustrating. And we could talk at a later time with you and your dad, but I hope that you found some support there, and that you didn't have to stay with that, with the damage without having addressed it with the perpetrators. And by that I mean, I always tell my staff that if a child feels or a student feels that he's been wrong or she's been wrong, as the people with power, we need to apologize. Even if it is a matter of perception, which in this case was not. But even if it is a matter that it was perceived differently, then you still apologize, because perception is reality. So I really hope that those with powers shared, at least acknowledge what they did wrong and apologize. And if not, I guess that's part of the expecting the non-closure, but it stinks because often we, people of color, especially women of color, are the ones that have to endure most of the non-closure experience.
Thank you. Jennifer or Melanie, would you like to jump in? Okay, so this next question is for Eric.
Okay.
As Thora's dad, can you please share with us what it's been like for you witnessing the impact of these incidents on Thora's social emotional well-being? And what advice can you share and provide to the parents, guardians that are here with us today?
Okay, well, thank you again. So as I said earlier, more often than not, when it comes to matters of my children's education, I feel akin to the Hulk. I'm always angry because this is but a portion of what I deal with, because I am the happy and proud father of 15-year-old triplets. And actually, Thora caught Thora caught the most hail, if I could speak kind of frankly here. She caught the most hail, but her story is not Genesis, and it's not isolated within my family, nor within the school. This teacher, Ms. Ventimiglia, is a clear and present danger to our children, and then the administration falls on deaf ears when you mention these things to them. Mr. Abdel, you mentioned that you mentioned something about perception, and I agree with you, and I can expound upon that a wee bit by saying, in the world I'm accustomed to, perception is halfway around the world before fact gets out of bed. And you are 1,000% in your right mind and in your belief that you best to believe I had all 9 of them in one room, and understanding what was the teachable moment. What you, Mr. French, whatever this person's name is, what is it that your father is a state trooper? So you tell me, what was the teachable moment in you reacting to my child like this? Miss Ventimiglia, what was the teachable moment in this? Why is it that my child at 13 years old is having to negotiate a hostile work environment? If this was there would be some easily EEOC rules and regulations for this. Here it is, we're teaching her at way too early an age. Another thing, that the adultification of our Black youth and Black young women, we're having to teach them these adult real world issues at such an early age. I have a young woman here. We're raising women, we're raising adults, but we're having to raise them at a different pace. I will close by saying this. I said she's one of this. All really kind of started with my son and this same teacher. And what after there's a the portal for parents and students to see their grades is called Power School. So parents, I'm looking at Power School and checking these things out, checking grades out, and after about 2/3 of the way, or 8 of the quarter, 2/3 or 3/4 of the quarter, I finally had enough with this teacher. I said, why is it in Power School something that you have to visit multiple times a week? Why is my child's name misspelled? My child's name is the first thing other than his breath that he received in life, and you disrespect my child and my family as such. So, and that equated to, oh, well, we just spelled his name right. Never received apology, never. So there's a real, as one question that I asked all of them while they was in the room, what was the teachable moment? And I asked them all, what is discipline? Because discipline is a part of their mission statement. And to a person, and they reiterated this to them, discipline has everything to do with being in an authoritative state of mind. And that is totally, absolutely, positively, I come from incorrect. I come from an organization, 20 years, 27 days in the military. We do discipline, I think, on a little bit more frequently than the average bear. So I understand what discipline is. And if you're about to try to tell me that discipline is anything other than this, as we know as educators, the is means equal. Discipline is training. If it's nothing, if it's not training, it's abuse. There's no other gray area. It's training. So what was the teachable moment about how you handling my child? You misspelling my child's name. You do it, and then, you telling me that we're going to reconvene after Thanksgiving, and I haven't heard from you since. And that was almost a year. That was, she was in the 8th grade. She started 10th grade. We still haven't had the conversation. So I'm always hot and looking for allies.
And the persistence with the advocacy for parents should definitely be ongoing, because helping to amplify the voices and the experiences of our children is everything. I'm going to shift over, and this question is going to be for our audience and the panelists. But before I do that, I just want to call our attention to the Q&A segment. We're literally tipping over into it. So I'm hoping that we can get a couple more questions answered, and then we'll open it up. And I apologize that we don't have the full 40 minutes of Q&A with the audience, but if you do have questions that you enter in the chat, if we're not able to get to them during this event, your questions will definitely be answered via email. This next question is, like I mentioned, for the audience. Now, there's a clip where the girls were participating in exercises requiring them to list words and phrases that have either been said to them or told to them by their teachers, parents, peers, or the media. Please, let's take a few seconds to complete this sentence. You hear people say about Black girls. Black girls are blank. And then to the panelists, they're gonna share some words that they have heard, and we're going to talk a little bit about their meaning and the implications to the girls. So audience, please complete this sentence, what you've heard them say about Black girls. Black girls are blank. I hear are thirsty. Abdel, can you please break that down for us?
Sure. For people that are not aware with the term or the concept, thirsty, it means overly sexual. It's someone that, quote unquote, is always like, and I'm going to use the H word, is horny. And it's always, it implies promiscuity. And of course, when we look at it, it goes hand in hand with making our Black girls being older than they are, and which was the case of our second grader, who when they called the police, they said, "Oh, it's a 12-year-old Black girl." 7-year-old, 12-year-old, developmentally very different, but to the eyes of those that were making the phone call, she was 12-year-old.
Yep. Alexandria.
So the word that I have is hot Cheeto girl. So basically what this means is that Black girl in the classroom who is, quote, kind of ghetto, always ready to fight or be argumentative. And to go even further, a Black girl who has, let's say, a 20-year-old drug dealer boyfriend, the way they dress, hoop earrings, and all of these other accessories. And I think when we try to actually unpack that, what comes to mind for me is perception, hypersexualization, and violence. And one of the books that I read a few months ago, I actually have it here, I recommend everybody get it. It's called Hood Feminism by Mickey Kendall. And she has a chapter about essentially like hypersexualization. And she says that you don't have to be sexually promiscuous to be labeled a fast tail girl. So perception is everything. So normal age appropriate behaviors are enough to make someone believe that you would cause trouble or you would do something that isn't right. And the implications are not just about bullying, but it's about whether or not people believe Black girls. So when you don't believe Black girls, they cannot access systems like the different systems that we have. If you already have a preconceived notion that, okay, they're hypersexual, they're dating this person that is not in their age group and it's inappropriate. And I think it's easier, again, to label Black girls these kind of terms rather than to actually go back in history and figure out why are we labeling these Black girls? Why are we labeling Black girls? And also the evolution of these terms and how white supremacy, again, has created these terms. And I think the last thing with that hot Cheeto girl term is violence, like that Black girls always want to fight. And stereotypes about Black girls in schools often are about violence again and causing trouble. And one thing, and going back to the documentary, is Kiara's story. She touched upon this, saying that, I was fighting, and I think that she stated that fighting was a way for her to like build friendships. And Thora also talked about this too when she was talking about Kiara, and like fighting was a way for her to make friendships. And instead of us taking a step back and asking, okay, why is this behavior happening, already assuming the worst. So those are kind of like how I'm unpacking that term and just like these terms in general.
Thank you. Melanie, your word?
So the word I had was dramatic, which I think can kind of be taken in a couple of different contexts, one of which sort of similar to what Alexandra was just saying, starting drama, getting in fights, being disruptive, and the implications of assuming that that's someone's personality trait, that's inherently what they are expected to do in school. On the other side, it could be kind of taken, the opposite of someone who is polite or respectful. They're dramatic, they're going to be loud, they're not going to kind of sit and play by the rules. And I think both implications, like we've all been saying, are really dangerous in kind of placing these really negative expectations and assumptions and kind of targets on Black girls rather than allowing them to express themselves and kind of have their own individuality. Placing these terms on them then kind of can create some really, really negative kind of self-perception cycles for Black girls.
Thank you for that. Jen, your word?
So my word was loud. And I think, a few things on that. I think culturally, girls of color, women of color, we speak on like a number scale, 1 to 10. We're more on an 8, right? Just naturally, we're more on an 8, passionate, what have you, where much of white society, their normal tone is a 3. So when someone comes across as an 8, the 3s are gonna be like, oh, wait, you're way too loud. But that's just the way we speak. On top of that, you have code switching, right? There's a lot of code switching. Like for those of you who know me, this is not how I usually speak. My voice is much deeper, but because I'm on this call right now, I'm up high. I'm like, hi, how are you, right? And all day when I teach, I have to be up high. When I speak to my white colleagues, I have to speak with this high-pitched, annoying tone, and that's just not my voice. Because if I did my normal voice, I would be considered loud, right? So I think that as a society, we need to determine what is understanding where the person's coming from, understanding background, and honestly, what is loud? Is loud where I'm disrupting you? Am I disturbing you? Am I bothering you? Or loud is that you're just not comfortable with what I'm saying? So that's what, when I hear loud, Black girls are loud, what does that really mean?
And also, does it mean that you need to quiet down? Is this a way that we're going to silence you? And
Yeah.
then now you are invisible?
Yeah, so we have that invisible, that it's like that Black girl magic that we talk about, but that's a way to shut it down, because when I'm loud, I don't want to be considered loud. I don't want my peers, or I don't want anyone talking negatively about me. So to satisfy you, those of you who are in charge, I shut down. So I go from my 8 to a 0. I don't even go down to a 3. I go to a 0 where I'm now invisible, where you don't see me, and I'm going to walk through my educational career as being invisible. For me personally, I became invisible in high school, where I did high school in 3 years. I literally wore the same outfit for like 3 months straight. No one noticed, not a teacher, not a student, like, hey, Jen, is something wrong? No one noticed. I was able to graduate high school in 3 years because, again, no teacher noticed that during, what do you call those classes when you take those classes where you don't go to classes, like a study hall? During study hall, instead of doing my study hall, I just jumped into a senior class. So I was in teachers' classes there. I wasn't even on their roster, but they gave me a grade. No one noticed until day of graduation, where I'm like, time for me to graduate. I have all my credits. They're like, who are you? Where have you been? Like, I've been sitting in these classes for 3 years. No one knew my name, And that's because, again, I had to go from my 8 to a 0. So I took advantage of my 0 and used that invisibility as my power.
And while Jen used Jen used her 0 to an advantage, and sort of like build power out of that. The irony is that in the system, when our Black girls go from an 8 to a 0, then we also punish them, because like they need to. They are not working at their full potential. They are not participating in classes they should be. So if they happen to be like a class grade, so they get the lowest one because they are not. We don't hear their voices. So the system makes you, silences you, and then punishes you for being silent.
And then hence we have the school to prison pipeline that's created because of all the disciplinary actions that follows. Thank you so much for that.
And
Dora,
all the trust issues, and we don't know how to get to her. We don't know, like, we've tried, like we're out of ideas. Well, no, like you're not out of ideas. You're out of desire to actually meet them where they are, and actually accept them and celebrate their not only the diversity but their culture, and teach them how to recognize the dangers that are there, and help them to learn code switching the best way possible. Yeah. So sorry, go ahead.
So we're gonna move, thank you, the passion, I love it. But it's looking like we're not gonna have our Q&A opportunity, unfortunately. And my sincerest apologies to folks who are looking forward to that. But if you do have questions, please put them in the chat, and you will get a response via email. I am going to ask Dora and then Eric to share your word and the implication briefly, please. Thank you.
My word was extra. I feel extra has many connotations to it, but it's just specifically for Black girls or people of color. I think extra can you being loud, or you being over the top, or you just simply expressing yourself, and then you'll be called extra by your peers. And I know one thing that comes to mind is that if you try to share your opinion about something that just happened, someone would be like, oh, you're being extra, it's not a big deal. Or, oh, you're being too dramatic, therefore you're being extra. It's not that much of a, big fuss about it. So I feel, extra just has many, many, many ways that you can use it. Yeah.
You wouldn't think to say that it's a positive, right? When we're using extra in that context.
In that context, no, I wouldn't say it's a positive, because I feel, especially for people of color, extra is a bad thing. You don't want to be too extra. With anything, you don't want to be too extra, because you're going to look how people are going to look at you wherever you go. Especially like even simple things like just dressing. You don't want to dress too extra, because then they're going to look at you funny. It's like, oh, look at the Black girl, look at the Black guy, he's so extra. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm getting some really positive responses. Folks are willing to stay extra even after our time together has ended, to answer a few questions. And I'm really, really happy about that. And I'm willing to do the same. Eric, you're up next, please.
Okay, thank you. My word was ghetto. It's actually what Alexandra used in the Hot Cheeto Girl and being ghetto. She referenced it, and also someone also mentioned, you have to get at the root of the word to understand what these things are, and using the word ghetto as it is implied here is a sub to me. It's just not proper English, because I look at ghetto in this sense as if I'm going to hear someone, and my goodness, this is one of my peeves. My children's teachers do it way too often. They use the word irregardless, and it just drives me out of my mind. No, it's not a word. And when you use ghetto and you assign and you apply it in the sense that it's being used here, you've changed the normal the root of the word. It's no longer a noun. It's not a place or something or a place where people live, as in referring to as the Jewish ghettos or Europe. It's no longer a verb. It's not that is associated with that place. You have been made something that has been a slang out of something, and assigned that you have bastardized this word and then assigned a meaning to it to our children, and it's just not right. And I'll stop.
Thank you. This next question is for the audience. So please get ready to answer this one. Do you think that social media reinforces racial biases and further damages the self-image of Black girls? I believe it's a poll question. Yes, no, or not sure are your options for answers. So do you think social media reinforces racial biases and further damages the self-image of Black girls? We hear all of these words that have been normalized, the extra, the Cheeto girls, ghetto, loud. Oh, 100% yes. Thank you so very much for that. I appreciate y'all's responses. And I have a question for all panelists, please. Now, based on what you've learned from watching the documentary, I'd like to know what bold actions can we take to address the racialized bias, the adultification, the emotional trauma, the criminalization of Black girls in schools. What can we do as parents, educators, administrators, leaders, activists, all of the above, to change this narrative? In 1 minute or less, I'd like everyone to respond, and then we're going to transition and give the floor to Melanie and Alexandria. And yes, we'll provide a few minutes for the audience to have a chance to talk.
Okay, I guess I'll start. I think one thing you guys could do is just speak up. Like, honestly, not enough people are talking about what happens in schools. I know it's a scary thing because obviously I am doing it, and it's a scary thing to do. But if you are witnessing something, you need to say something, because you don't know what's happening to that person behind the scenes. And just for them to go into school or go out to somewhere where they're supposed to feel safe and they don't feel safe, it's just constant stress. And like, if you can do something to stop that or to lessen that, it's amazing. So just speak out if you see something. Yeah.
Yes.
I would say educate yourself, educate yourself, educate yourself. And when you feel that you are done learning, keep educating yourself. And remember that there's a danger if the one single story, our Black girls come with a beautiful multitude polyvalent storyline, and each of those stories need to be celebrated, lifted, and as you are celebrating them, also be like hold yourself accountable, not only by educating yourself but also by holding people around you accountable. So if you're an administrator and you have the chance to lead, lead with passion, with compassion in the heart, and making sure that what is at stake here, which is the well-being of our Black girls, is preserved, because we are valuing impact over intent.
I want to agree both with Abdel and Dora. And I would also, like, from a political standpoint, I think we truly need more task forces that protect Black girls. A lot of times in politics, I think politicians are so like, they're a little bit, I don't want to say the word scared, but what I'm noticing is that they are not able to explicitly like say the words Black girls or really call out the prejudice and bias towards Black girls. And we need more legal sanctions or task forces that are working to kind of dismantle a lot of these biases. And I think another thing is changing the curriculum. I'm reflecting on like my college experience was the first time ever where an educator said, okay, look at what you're reading or look at the syllabi. How many Black women are on this, how many Black women are on the syllabi? And I think kind of going back to what the documentary said, Black girls need to see themselves in literature. They need to see themselves in art. That truly promotes their well-being. And I think when they're only reading like Edgar Allan Poe or like some other, just like a straight white man, like that's not it. There's so many other there's so many other artists and people that have done beautiful things in culture and art that are reflective of their experiences. And I think going back to what Thora said is Malden community members need to speak out. We can't rely on this Malden is diverse narrative. It's just not gonna work. It doesn't work. We have to start accepting the harrowing like stories that are being shared and worked as a collective. And then the last thing is going back to what Abdel said, is exploring the diversity of like Black girlhood. Like we have Jamaican, we have Nigerians, we have people from Dominican Republic, like so many Puerto Rican, like we have so many beautiful Black and Latinx girls, and they all have different experiences. So, you know, changing the curriculum, like making sure that everybody has a place. So I think those are some things that could be useful.
And I can jump in real quick and kind of echo a lot of what Alexandria is saying. My role in this work really comes from the research and advocacy that I do in my job. And so much of that is really kind of focused on the larger systemic picture. And so much of that is collecting stories and creating coalitions where people can join together and become larger than just themselves to then push policymakers to create change, whether that's DESI, whether that's creating legislation, whether that's, you know, advocating at different school board meetings, whatever it is. I think it's really, really powerful when people can kind of come together to push on those policymakers and create change. And I'm happy after this to talk a little bit about how Massachusetts Appleseed is doing that if you're interested in getting involved there and helping kind of contribute your stories to our efforts. But I'd say, you know, look out for those community organizations or political organizations, whether, you know, in Malden or across the state, because we're all looking for as many people as possible to kind of share our voices collaboratively, because that's how people will unfortunately listen. They're not just going to listen to one story. They want to know this is a problem everywhere. And so that's a big part of what we're trying to do. And I think everyone's voice can be helpful in that.
Absolutely. Data speaks, data informs, and having policies set in place for reporting goes a very, very long way. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more about what you're doing, Melanie. Can we hear from Jennifer, please?
Hi, yes. So I think as a community, so as a teacher, I think it's important that we just take time to listen we don't do a lot of listening as educators. We regurgitate information to the kids, expecting them to, retain what we say. And we don't take the time to listen and be informed, because there's a lot that we as educators can learn from them, which would put us in a better position to then teach the child, right? I think along the line that I think it's important that before you really educate a child, first get to know them, because I may be delivering something and I may have the best intention, but if it's almost like the love languages, right? I may not speak your love language. I could be telling you I love you in German. If you don't speak German, my I love you means nothing. So I need to take the time as an educator to get to know you, understand who you are, how you understand, how you take in information. And so then I can be a better service to you, because that's, at the end of the day, that's our job as educators, to service the child, to provide for them. And, for many, unfortunately, for many of our Black girls, our society pushes them to the side. They're either invisible or they're sexualized.
Mhm.
And we as educators need to change that narrative, because we have the power to do so, whether it's fear or ignorance, whatever it is, but we need to change that on our part.
Yeah, and Jen, Jen knows my slogan, my motto, which is, it is the relationship that saves. And speaking about language of love, if I say I love you in German, not only will you not get it, you might be scared. So it's the same thing. Like if we don't have educators, whether they are administrators or teachers, professionals, secretaries, custodial staff, that give primacy to the relationship building, so that the child is stable, nothing else is going to work.
Thank you so much for that. Anyone else who I've missed? It's now 6:02. We'd like to hear from Melanie and Alexandria. And folks, please check out, we have resources in the chat that's popping up, and legislative things that you can do on your part to reach out to amplify this information that you've received. So please get some resources from the chat. Eric.
Thank you, Erga. Since the slant kind of went to politics, let me get some real world context into what I kind of in a couple of local Malden politics on a page and stuff, and it is the political season right now in Malden and around the country and stuff like this. And a couple of weeks ago, the Malden Advocate ran, top, on front page above the fold, Mystic Valley Regional Charter School, mine of 50,000 square feet in Maplewood Square. People lost their minds. You have at least 3 people, politicians, sign a statement, put their names to a statement that now the public should have a say in how public monies are being spent about in Mystic Valley, and with the purchases of these properties in Maplewood Square. So I'm like, where was all Mystic Valley Regional Charter School is the largest property owner in the 2-block area of St. Joseph's Catholic Catholic Church. Where was your angst then? They have huge property holdings on Highland Ave, Eastern Ave. Where was your angst then? Did you also fail to see in the very same paper, it wasn't on the front page, but it was on page 5, that stated that the Mystic Valley chapter of the NAACP just hired a youth coordinator, and one of his stated roles that was stated in the article was that they were to be a liaison between Mystic Valley alumni and parents to work on issues of discrimination. You didn't see that in the same paper? And now you get your dandruff is all up because they're buying up half of Maplewood Square, and the couple restaurants, Panda Panda Castle and Serena's may be out of business. I love Serena. Serena's is the owner of Serena's. He sends his kids to Mystic Valley. So, but then you have another politician that goes, "Oh, now I'm glad. It's good to see that the NAACP is becoming involved. NAACP has been involved. Where have you been?" So I'm gonna go exhale here a little bit on these guys.
Woosah moment. Strategy matters. It's important to be informed so that this narrative can shift in a major way. I'm going to open the floor to
Okay, can
Melanie.
we just add one more thing that Eric reminded me of?
Yes.
And as I mentioned, like educate yourself. And when you're tired and you think you're done, educate yourself more. And this is the pet peeve of mine. Be aware of the people that are using the terms equity, inclusion, and belonging for their own purpose and wrongly. Because you are going to see that it's already happening in multiple school districts. It's already happening at the state level and also at the national level, where they are trying to corrupt the language and maybe even create policies in the name of equity that in reality are not based on equity. So make sure that you understand what equity and racial equity and educational equity means, what it looks like. So when you have a representative, a school board, a mayor, a senator, a congressperson saying, "Oh, we're doing this because of equity," you could say, "Well, but you listen, hold your horses there. That's not equity. This is what equity is."
And the accountability aspect as well, because it sounds really good when we're reading it, but in practice, it might be something contradictory. And we need to be calling people in and calling them out by any means necessary if we really want to move towards change and to shift this narrative around. So overall, I'm just going to quickly summarize where we need to speak up. The accountability is important. Lead with compassion and love. Impact over intent. Keep learning. We need task force to protect our BIPOC youth. We definitely need to decolonize the curricula ASAP, even if it's not done on a national level, because we know that it's going to take time, but locally we can get this done. It's very, very possible. And we need policies and procedures where we can document, because if it's not documented, it didn't happen. I open the floor to you, Melanie, and then Alexandria.
Thank you so much. So just to provide a little bit more context on my role in this conversation, Massachusetts Appleseed last year released a data-driven report looking at the disparities between Black girls and white girls when it comes to exclusionary discipline. I'm going to put the report that we released in the chat here for anyone that's interested in reviewing it. And for us, it's so important as a research and advocacy organization, like Ergo was saying, to document what's going on, because that's how you can present it to a policymaker, to a legislator, and prove objectively that there is a problem here. Even if it's not your experience, it is a problem and we need to address it. That report, though, was completely based upon data, which, while very, very important, doesn't necessarily tell the whole story, because like the Pushout movie showed, there's so many different versions of this, and yet it's impacting every Black girl. And so we're following up this report that we released in September with a new research project to really dig into the qualitative narrative behind these stories, again, that we can do in a research evidence practice way, put it in a report, show it to legislators and to the DESI folks and say, this is a problem, and also to work with folks to identify recommendations to create change. And in order to do that, we've created a community advisory board with actually Thora on this call. Thank you, Erika, for connecting us. And we have folks from all across the state working with us, because we know as a white woman right here, as a researcher, it's not my story to tell. So I'm going to use my voice to bring in those with lived experience, to bring in those that are actively advocating for young people. And we're collaboratively designing this new follow-up study that is going to center the stories, so that when this report is done, we'll have the data on one side, we'll have all the stories collectively, so we can show, here are the patterns, and we're going to interview young people and say, what do you want to see change, and lift up their voices. And hopefully through these two reports together, we're going to kind of build a coalition and really systemically try to change what's happening. Obviously, that's a big, big goal, but it's what we're working on. If anyone's interested in kind of helping connect us with folks that want to share their story later on in our process, I'll put my email in the chat. If you want to get involved, please let me know. Like I said, our goal is really to be a conduit to lift up these stories to policymakers so that objectively they're not just hearing anecdotally what's going on, but there's evidence that in Massachusetts in particular, this is what's going on. So thank you for letting me share that. And if anyone wants to get involved, I'll put my email in the chat.
Fantastic, thank you. We gotta lock arms to get this work done, and it's getting done with fidelity. So you're bringing me hope. Thank you so very much for that. Alexandria, you're up.
Yes, I'm not going to take too long. I am approaching this conversation from a research perspective, but also as the director of political advocacy at Black Boston. Black Boston is a nonprofit organization that truly serves the Black Bostonian community. And my role as the director of political advocacy is to ensure that Black youth in particular are politically engaged. And we have different committees. So we have the political advocacy committee, we have our education committee, and we also have our mental health advocacy. So Black Boston, we believe that in order to promote the well-being of Black Bostonians, we have to do it within different mediums. And one of the issues that Black Boston that we're noticing that we want to, that we recently had a campaign called Boost Black Girls that relates to this conversation is the ongoing crisis of missing Black girls. So Massachusetts has a data problem, has a huge data problem. We don't really know like what's going on, particularly the relationship between missing Black girls and human trafficking and different forms of exploitation. And those two issues are inextricably linked. And a lot of politicians are aware of these issues, specifically the ongoing crisis of missing Black girls, but aren't really doing enough to address it, or we haven't really seen anybody speak out on it. So Boost Black Girls is calling for task forces to provide more legal sanctions for Black girls and really understanding how we can use data as kind of like a form of resistance or a form of social justice to really get at the problem, because without data, you can't really like quantify what's going on, and without quantifying anything, you really can't figure out where the gaps are. So one of the big issues that we're seeing is on social media, we're like social justice advocates and community organizers are seeing Black girls missing flyers being circulated around social media, but then we find out later, oh, this Black girl passed, or we don't know where she is, and that's an issue. I recently spoke at the Joint Committee of Civil Rights and Racial Justice that is headed by, I believe, Representative Sonia Chain Diaz and Representative Williams, I believe, and I spoke about it. So I'm hoping that we can continue this conversation. And so what Melanie's point is that there's just so many different issues that are affecting Black girls. So we're gonna need to address human trafficking, we're gonna need to address missing Black girls, we're gonna need to address education. So there's a lot, and it's gonna take not just the intellectual labor of Black women and girls, it's gonna take everybody to do the work.
Absolutely, and the tie-in is the importance of data.
Right.
Data informs, so that's a critical aspect. We are now at the 6:14 p.m. I want to thank you all for being here with us today. My heart is so moved. I feel so hopeful on the inside. I want to big up the Malden Public Library, Stacy, for all your hard work, Leora Norwick from the Network for Social Justice, and the NAACP Mystic Valley Area Branch for making this all possible. And of course, to you, each individual panelist here. When I say phenomenal, y'all are phenomenal. I've learned so much, and I hope that the audience did as well. Shout out to all of y'all, and any lasting remarks that we want to share before we end our time together? Thora, thank you so very much. Jennifer, you are loved and appreciated, really proud of you. 17 years since we had a Black woman teacher of the year. Woo! Congratulations.
Thank you.
and you represent us so well. Continue to do the things that you're doing. Abdel, Cambridge is very lucky to have you. Melanie, keep up the good work. I'm here to continue to make these necessary connections. Eric, as a parent, you're amazing and you inspire me, and it's okay to be angry. It's what we do with it. Strategy matters. Let's lock arms to make changes happen. Laura, I appreciate you. I could create like a little, what do they call that? You're the hero, right? I want to learn how to sew so I can make one of those things. What do they call it that makes them fly?
A banner?
A cape, the
A cape,
best cape ever. And I totally will bedazzle it.
I'll have my cape in theory. It's like right here.
Oh,
It's very
yes.
beautiful.
And your crown, thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's very nice.
Thank you all very much for the time spent today. And we have some interesting things. Juan, thank you for being here. She says that we need to address racist algorithms that censor voices of Black women who use digital platforms as a means of social justice. On that note, thank you all. Be well, and we'll stay connected. Bye-bye.
Keep up the fight, keep up the love, don't lose hope.
Goodbye.
Bye.